We appreciate you coming by. It's always a pleasure to partner up with Lisa's to see if we are able to just offer some tips and tricks to this challenging um, um, diagnosis of dementia for the most part. But a lot of these tips work for other diagnoses as well. So please, if I should happen to say dementia, please realize that this works with other suggestions as well. So, with that being in mind, our topic today is something with everything going on now with the whole COVID outbreak. I figured what might be nice to do is to talk about different in home activities that we might be able to provide our loved ones for the sake of um, just our sake as well as their sake. And these activities might be ideas that you can use if you happen to have a loved one who happens to be in a community somewhere. So please feel free to take notes, ask questions, and by all means, if you have a tip or trick that will work in this regard, please feel free to share it. If you have an activity that's been working well with your mother or your husband or whomever, please feel free to share it. This, as Keena mentioned earlier, is really an interactive session. Although we're online now, that does not mean that we are not welcoming those suggestions. Please speak freely. Before we get started on today's main topic, I would like to address two questions that came in from the field prior to the session today. The first comes in stating about a loved one who is at this point of their diagnosis, they are eating with wrong utensils while at home and in public, and how the best way might be to help work with that challenge. As we all know, as the dementia diagnosis progresses, our loved ones, not only is the judgment piece, it might slip when it comes from time to time, but we also might find out that behaviors or activities that we take for granted are no longer as easy as they once were for our loved ones. For this particular example, eating with utensils. At times, there is a disconnect between holding a utensil in their hand and being able to feed themselves in some cases, or actually being able to hold it properly. In some cases, a person might take a cup or a glass, and instead of finding their mouth, they might pour it off on the side. This is just a matter of realizing that progression is occurring and just encourage them as much as possible to, in a patient and kind manner, to hold the utensil in the proper way. So if they're holding even down to a pen, if they're trying to write something, or if we're talking a fork, just ask them, can I please help you with that? And then just gently take it and turn it into the right direction so that it can be used properly. At that point in time, hopefully they will be able to continue feeding themselves. Does that mean that they will not possibly spill their food? It does not mean that. At that point, it might just be a matter of reconnecting and suggesting maybe that we sit with one another so that you can sit closer to them and assist them with what we call a hand over hand technique, which is your hand will go under their hand and you just help guide their hand to their mouth with the utensil and the food. It's just a matter of working it through with what's going to work best for your loved one. This is unfortunately not a one size fit all type answer because all situations are different. At times in restaurants and other places, when you end up having more people and more stimuli, that might be what we call a trigger. And that trigger might indeed kick in not being able to hold the utensil properly, or the cup or the glass. If that also is occurring, maybe we might just suggest a different type of food so that the food does not necessarily fall off the utensil or fall onto the floor. Hopefully, that might help a little bit. Um, another question that was posed was about using a public restroom, that an at home patient of dementia seems to be putting used toilet paper in a waste can instead of a toilet. This is something we see quite often as well. Again, that disconnect is occurring because of the progression of the disease. We can encourage an individual to 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 use the toilet for that waste. If we are in the room with them and assisting them as they are still trying to um, have their own independence, we can just share with them to drop the waste into the toilet as opposed to the waste can. And if they do happen to drop it in the waste can, that's okay. Let's just keep the waste can with a liner in it, and then we just tie the liner up, tie the bag up, and remove the trash bag at that particular time. The thing with dementia and any caregiving situation, patience is huge, and it is going to be challenging. But patience is a big step towards that. So hopefully those tips will help as far as that's concerned. Um, with this time of COVID, we're supposed to all be staying at home. We're supposed to stay away from other people. Well, that brings a challenge to itself. We are sitting at home. A lot of us may be retired, but those people that are around us might still be working and they might be in the house more often now. That can become more of a challenge and be a trigger for someone who is just used to having one caregiver at their side during the course of the day. Now they might have two or three people in the house. That extra activity could not only become a distraction, but could be a trigger. So hopefully what we'll discuss now will be some ways that might be helpful so that you can have your day to day a little bit more structured and a little bit less chaotic. Let's just talk about how activities should be structured for an individual and what the end goal should be. One of the things that we want to keep in mind when we're starting to structure activities or set up activities for the day, we want to make sure that the activities are going to help enhance the self esteem of the individual. We don't necessarily want to have them engage in an activity that's going to set them up to fail. That would just possibly set up frustration, and that frustration can kick in a trigger um, that will trigger a behavior that wouldn't necessarily be good for our loved one or for ourselves. We want to make sure we structure an appropriate amount of time for that activity and to talk that time frame through to our loved one so that as time begins to end, that they do not have a negative response to us stopping all of a sudden. For example, we have folks in our building who like to do puzzles. And when they're engaged in a puzzle, that is great for them and they really enjoy that. However, we found that if we do the puzzle, if we start the puzzle around 11:30 and lunch is at 12, then it's time for lunch at 12. If they're still engaged, they might become a little verbally abusive because they want to continue working on the puzzle. However, if you let them know, okay, we're going to work on this for a little while, because they don't necessarily still have the concept of time or telling time, we'll work on this for a little while and then we'll go ahead and we'll eat. So that way you can work on that puzzle or work on whatever and let them know, we'll do this now for about another 5 minutes or for just a short period longer. And then we'll move on and have lunch. That way, it gives them a moment to try to process what it is you're saying. And if they're still able to process that amount of time, you're giving them a warning that we'll be stopping this soon, as opposed to, okay, let's stop and go eat, or stop and use the restroom, or stop and go to the doctor. Um, Please, during this time of activities, provide some sort of sense of engagement or usefulness or accomplishment. We want to preserve a person's dignity. And the best way of doing that, again, is not setting them up for failure, but letting someone feel like that we've accomplished something. How do we feel when we have a task at hand that we haven't a clue how to do? But if we take it in small steps where we can accomplish this step, then we can accomplish the next step. Remember, it's not the end goal that is the main focus. It's just that next step. We want to make sure we're creating what we like to call here at Colonial Gardens a meaningful moment. And if that moment happens to be a great accomplishment for this step, then we can focus on that for a while longer, as opposed to going on to the next step that might be a little bit of a challenge. Of course, we want to continue to create those feelings of security and togetherness. And by doing activities, it might, again, I stress the word might, reduce that behavior that might be causing an issue, such as if you happen to have a loved one who is a wanderer. If you're able to engage an individual in an activity that really piques their interest, then maybe the wandering behavior might settle for a moment. An example I like to give for that is, we have a gentleman here who is a wanderer. All day long, he wanders, and at times he's trying our doors, trying to get out. He'll hear the alarm go off and he'll turn around and come back in, or turn around from the door, come back away from the door, but he'll try the door. But he's going to wander the building all day long. He also he used to be a fire marshal, so he'll check the fire extinguishers to make sure that they're to date. But one of the things he used to do was, he and his loved ones used to sit around and watch ball games and sit and have beer and peanuts. Well, we decided to try that and see if that would help engage him in an activity as opposed to wandering. And it worked out perfectly. We had beer, non-alcoholic beer, of course, like O'Doul's, but we had beer and peanuts. And so we gathered a group of the men together, because a lot of the women were having high tea. And the men got together and they sat down and enjoyed themselves popping peanuts and throwing them on the floor of our activity room. And they sat there and they drank their beer. Well, this gentleman, who again will wander all day long, sat for 2 hours popping peanuts, drinking his beer, and just having conversation, and I put that in quotes as well, with the other folks around him. That sat him down for about 2 hours. That is rare with him, but it was something that engaged him, that he could remember he used to do, and it was something he enjoyed. So it brought a sense of togetherness for him. It helped reduce the wandering behavior, and it definitely gave him a meaningful moment. So those are just some things to keep in mind as a goal for the activities that you're setting up. Now, don't set yourself up for failure during this, because if you have a beer and peanuts night, don't get upset when they pop the peanuts and throw them on the floor. If you used to go to Longhorn Steakhouse, and this is what the habit was back then, if he throws it on the floor, there's no need to get upset. He's just going through what his long-term memory puts in front of him. Looks like I have a question here, and it is asking, my loved one gets angry when I schedule activities. He needs them, or else he just sits all day, but he doesn't want me telling him what to do. Is there any way around this? There's a couple of things that might work. We have folks here that don't necessarily want to do anything. They prefer just to stay in the room. However, we try our best to keep folks engaged at all times. So again, one of the tips is be flexible and be patient with these ideas. Um, Encourage that involvement, but the involvement should be something that they used to like to do. Maybe asking, what would you like to do today, Daryl? Or bringing out some things. If, let's use the gentleman I was just talking about, if he used to like beer and peanuts and watching the game, maybe to start off with, we'll turn the game on the TV. Maybe that might spark some recollection and at least get him to maybe take a look at the TV. Now, mind you, I understand not everybody's still at the point in their diagnosis where they're interested in TV. I'm just citing an example. And that might start that long-term memory kicking in that, oh, I used to do that. And I used to have beer and peanuts. Well, then if you bring out popcorn or peanuts and set it out on a table in front of the TV and ask, would you like to have some peanuts with me? Or would you like to have some peanuts or popcorn or whatever their favorite snack used to be? And then you bring out a beer. How about a beer? As opposed to, let's sit down and do this. Now you're trying to engage them and get their buy-in. Oh, Carolina's playing tonight. Sorry, Clemson fans. My wife has turned me into a Carolina person. So, oh, I think Carolina's playing tonight. How would that be cool to watch? Building up that sense of excitement about it, about that particular activity. Possibly this might help, but we'll go over some other tips for those type of activities, and maybe one of these might work better than some others. What we'll do is, we want to do is avoid correcting an individual. So if you are able to get them to sit down and do something they used to like to do, like a puzzle, or one of the activities that we do here with some of our residents is Pictionary, where we'll just pull out a big easel and we'll sit there and have them draw something for us to try to understand what it is or try to guess what it is. And at times we'll draw it as well for the residents to try to guess what it is. And after a while, if the residents are not having a clue at what it is you're doing, but they should happen to make a suggestion, then you can turn around and say, so you think my cat looks like a bird? If you're drawing a cat and they should happen to say house, and they haven't hit on anything that is close to being a house, but they keep saying cat or dog, you can say, you're right. You're meeting with them where they are, as opposed to having an argument with them. The big thing about dementia is just meeting an individual where they are. If they happen to think that it's 1942 and that happens to be a warplane that you're drawing, then that's okay. Then let it be a warplane. And then from there, turn it from Pictionary to, so what made you think about the airplane? Or what memories, what makes you think about the airplane? Did you used to be a pilot? Or if they happen to be a pilot, tell me some of the things that you used to do or you experienced as you were piloting. That long-term memory, hopefully will still be there and they'll be able to share that with you. Again, these suggestions are just suggestions. They might work for some and maybe not for others. As we're working on these activities, help our loved one remain as independent as possible. Of course, simplify the instructions and take it step by step. Small steps, not big steps. And again, I mentioned this earlier. Remember, it's not necessarily the end goal that's in mind. It's that first step that you want to accomplish. And once that accomplishment is made, let's make a big deal out of it before we move into the next step, because we're building that self-esteem we talked about earlier. Keeping a an established routine works well as well. And this might help as far as um, the gentleman who does not like being told what to do. But if we have this routine, and this is the routine and part of the day that we always eat or we always have an activity, that might help um, get them into that routine or help them expect it. If a person's starting to get frustrated with the activity, again, be flexible. It might just be a matter of um, you want to just look after their feelings. If they're getting frustrated and upset and starting to tear up, or you see that when they get frustrated, they start to stutter and they're starting to stutter, then it might be time to move on to another activity, or you begin to help a little bit more because that part of the activity might be a little bit too difficult for them at that point in time. And of course, during all of this, you're providing encouragement and you're providing support. Again, we're not setting our loved one up for failure. We're setting them up to have a meaningful moment. We're setting them up so that they can enjoy the day. We're setting them up to enjoy time with you and have that meaningful moment to recall, oh, I used to do this a lot when I was younger, or me and my sisters and brothers, we used to do this. So those are just some tips to keep in mind. Um, Remember, when you're thinking about these tasks, consider what they'll enjoy, not necessarily what you'll enjoy. You want to consider their tastes, not yours. And that's hard. That's hard to do. Keep the skill set in mind where your loved one happens to be at this particular time. If they are to the point where they're having trouble holding a utensil, then the last thing we want to do is give them something to hold in their hand where that's going to be their focus and take away the enjoyment from the activity. Again, focus on the enjoyment, not the activity itself. So if they're able to work out something small, then that's what we play up, not the fact that they happen to take the peanuts, crack the shells, and throw them on the floor. We have peanut shells. We used to always go to Longhorn Steakhouse where we throw the peanuts on the floor. There's no need to get upset if they happen to throw it on the floor. We'll pick it up later. It's something simple we can do later on. Or that's another activity. We can engage them and say, now that we're done, can you help me pick this stuff up off the floor? It might be something they might be willing to do. If you can, relate the activity to someone's work life. When I first started working here 3 years ago, we had a woman who would always come to the nurse's station around 3 o'clock. And she would stand and look at us, and she'd put her hands up here and she'd start to shake and she'd start to cry. And she'd say, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. And she would just get tearful to the point of boohooing. After a while, it dawned on our activities director that she remembered this woman used to be an office worker. And so what she was doing was around 3 o'clock, she'd come, that was her schedule, that was her routine. And she was looking for something to do. And the only way she could communicate it was to say, I don't know what I'm going to do. It wasn't as if something was happening to her. It was, she was looking, that was her way of verbalizing, what can I do to help? So around 3 o'clock every day, we would have the next day's mail ready to have stamps placed on them. We would end up having letters that needed to be folded. We would end up having napkins that needed to be folded. And this gave her an opportunity to do something she was used to doing. And while she was doing those activities, she happened to realize that she had a sense of accomplishment. And those days of crying are now days of accomplishment, satisfaction, and happiness. So that worked out perfectly for her. And so at that point, at 3 o'clock, when she came, she was coming to work. She was not coming to the nurse's station to cry. It all of a sudden gave her a meaningful moment. We have another gentleman who used to be a metal worker. He used to fabricate metal. And in the back of his house, he had his metal shop with his lathes and all that type of equipment. Well, he would walk around the building all day long and he would start feeling the surface of things to feel if they were too rough, or he'd feel the corners or the edges, and he'd get down low on tables and counters, and he was checking it out to see what he can do for it. So what we would do with him is we ended up getting a ceiling fan from Walmart. It already comes in pieces. We laid out all the pieces onto a table and we would ask him, would you mind helping us put this together? He would sit there, or actually stand at the table for an hour and a half trying to put that fan together. And as long as he was trying to do that, he felt like he was accomplishing something. And he stayed there just messing with it for about an hour and a half, which was awesome for him. And then every once in a while, we'd come over just to make sure everything was okay. We weren't trying to do it for him, and he would have been frustrated had we started doing it for him. But we were just checking to see, are you okay? Do you need any help? So we set him up at that point. Even though he couldn't finish it, he still felt that he was still doing something. He was still being productive. Um, so just a couple of other tips to keep in mind. Now, you saw the young lady that just happened to walk by me. She is our director of nursing, and I happened to ask her if she happened to have this business card of there's a company that used to produce these cards that I fell in love with. And I had given it to her because I would love for us to produce these cards and give them to not only the family members of our residents when they would take them out for a lunch or dinner or snack, but for you guys as well. And this goes back to our original conversation about an individual when you're going to a restaurant or you're going to a public place. How can you help that individual make it through the meal or without them being a quote unquote disruption? When you go to a meal, you don't want to think of your loved one as a disruption. What you want to do is you want to enjoy your meal. So something that someone created is this business card. And I don't know if you see what it says, but it basically says, please be patient as a big header. And the rest of it states, the person with me has dementia or Alzheimer's or a similar diagnosis and may require a few extra moments. And at the bottom of it, it says, thank you for understanding. So as you sit down at the table, you can take out a few business cards for the tables around you, and you can place them at those tables, just so people have an understanding of what's going on. And if people know, people can be more sympathetic, or at least empathetic. And that might help them explain to their child or to someone with them, oh, okay, so something might happen at the table next to us, but that's because this person has a disease called dementia, and they can explain it to the person with them as opposed to the child staring at you and your loved one. Not only that, but you can present this card to the server so they're aware and they can be a little more patient when they're asking for someone's order. Or if your loved one happens to repeat the same question over and over to them, at least now the server will understand what's going on. The same thing if you happen to take someone shopping. So forgive me for going back to that earlier question about the restaurant, etc. But I just want to share this with you. And if you give me a couple of weeks, I'll have some of these. You can just ask for those later from me. Someone mentioned in reference to these cards, someone said, I have provided I've been provided with similar cards by Alzheimer's Los Angeles and have used those for years. So there it is. Again, will it work for everybody? No, but at least you're giving the people around you a heads up on what's going on. And a lot of times it's just a matter of setting expectations. If people have, if they have an expectation or they have the knowledge that this might occur, then people a lot of times can be more understanding. So let's talk about types of activities. I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to ask you guys. Keena mentioned to you earlier, all you have to do is hit the space bar if you're using your computer. If not, just unmute. But what type of activities are you doing with your loved one? And what seems to work for your loved one? Anybody? Ah, okay. I see someone's joining in. Hey, Elena.
Hi. Um, One of the things that I did with my mother and my aunt was to get one of the children's games, like a memory game. I guess when we were older, they were like a concentration,
Yes, ma'am.
and they really enjoyed that. We also got a bingo set, even though we're at home. They enjoyed that, and the caregivers were able to use that with them as well. And forgive me if I'm going back to something you said, because as I told Ken, I have two activities at the same time, plus taking care of of two grandbabies.
Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that we didn't do as much as we should have, and I'm now, and I run a support group, I'm a support group facilitator, encouraging the people to interview their loved ones about time, Vietnam War, World War II, or depending on their age, for your sake as well as theirs. Because once their memory is gone or they're gone, you look back and you say, oh my gosh, mom lived through that, dad lived through that, and I never asked them how it was. And one of the things that I learned at Lisa's several years ago, she had an instructor who would have an activity with the group where the two people with the dementia were interviewing each other. And it was amazing how people who couldn't tell you who they were could tell you the other person's story after a few minutes when they interviewed each other.
Oh, Elena, thank you for that suggestion. All of those are great ideas, but for right now, what I'd like to do is focus on the interview. One of the things that we try to do here at Colonial Gardens is we try our best before a resident moves in. We try our best to learn as much about that individual as possible for three reasons. First and foremost, because once that individual moves in, then we already have an idea on how to relate to that individual. So they, at that point, are a valid member of the community. They're just not part of the population. But whenever they start to talk about something or they do something, we start understanding what it is they're trying to do. I mentioned earlier about the gentleman who was the metal worker, and when he was trying to figure out, he's running his hand along a counter. We knew he was trying to see how level that was or how smooth it was. What could he do to better that? So we were able to build on that. If an individual starts talking, I love using this example. If an individual is an exit seeker and they happen to be looking at the door or they're pushing on the door trying to see how long that alarm goes or something of that nature, so that we don't have to walk up to them and put our hands on them to turn them around. We can walk up to them and say, oh, Mr. Daryl, so have you seen Fluffy? Because we know that Daryl had a long-haired white shepherd in 1984 that he loved dearly, and his name was Fluffy. So have you seen Fluffy? And that person will come away from the door on their own and look at you and say, no, I haven't. Would you mind helping me look for Fluffy then? And then I can turn around and start walking away from the door, and that person will follow me away from the door. I have not touched them. I have not confronted them. I have not told them no. I have not told them that they cannot go outside. I just engaged them with a long-term memory. So Miss Elena, thank you for that. If you know your loved one's likes, or if you're a caregiver and you don't happen to know that person at this time, talk to them. What did you used to do? What did you used to like to do in the summertime? It's so hot outside. What did you used to do in the summertime to beat the heat? Just ask simple questions. You'll be amazed at what they'll tell you, but more importantly, you'll be touched at what you'll learn. Everyone has a story, and once you learn it, you can engage with them better, you can redirect them better, but it brings a closeness between the two of you. So thank you, Miss Elena. That's beautiful. Anybody else? Anybody else have any activities that or tips for activities that you used to do with your loved one or do with your loved one?
This is Elena again. When you were talking about the lady who did work, again, because we're in our home, we're in your home with the loved ones, I
Mhm.
found that my mother could actually take a bowl of, you give her some cornmeal and something and have her to, just stir it up and say, we need you to make the cornbread for dinner. Can you peel the carrots? Little things that, especially for the ladies, um, that they used to do. And my mother used to just say, oh, I'm so glad now I can help you. And it was something minimal,
Yes,
but
ma'am.
those kind of things that we sometimes think, oh my gosh, mom can't do it anymore. Let her try. Let her fold the linen. Um,
Are you
things that
reading my
help.
notes? Because it says right there, chores, mealtime, personal care. Ask to help with those. So thank you again. You're hired. Come here anytime if you want to help volunteer or get a job.
You're in South Carolina?
Yes, ma'am.
That's my family's home state. So we can talk about that later.
It's just a small commute from LA.
Yeah. But no, I was going to say, my husband and I were caregivers for over 12 years with our family members. So I have a lot of things that we've done over the years. And like I said, a lot of it I learned at Lisa's in LA.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you very much for your input. Miss Sarah, I see that you unmuted yourself. Do you have a thought or something to share?
Yes, thank you. What I would like to ask is, those were helpful suggestions, and the facility that you work sounds wonderful. My mom is in a facility, and certainly now with COVID, they're overwhelmed by the pivot that they've had to make to deliver all meals to their rooms. And so there isn't really the time or interaction for them to gauge in some of these tips and tricks and strategies that you all are suggesting, which are wonderful. And as a family, we've been not allowed to see my mom or our loved ones. So I was wondering if you had any input for us who are living through, well, we're all living through COVID, but what I believe Miss Elena said, her people are, if they're in the house with you, then some of these things that you're saying are great, but what do we do when they're not?
Great question. I've seen some buildings, not necessarily ours, but what they're doing is um, they're playing tic-tac-toe with their loved ones. They're encouraging their family members to still come to the building, although you can't get inside, but you can have a window visit. And from the window visits that we do here, a lot of times you're just talking through the window or you're on the phone with the individual on the other side of the window so that you can hear each other clearly talking. But what some buildings are doing is they're taking painter's tape and they're going to their loved one's window and they're putting the tape on the window, making tic-tac-toe boards. And then they have erasable pins where they're markers, where they're able to mark on the window and play tic-tac-toe. Or they're able to do things where they're able to draw on the window. They're asking they're providing the materials and asking the facility, can I paint with my mom? So what they will do is they'll go and they'll do an outline of something and ask mom to paint it. So I guess the point of what I'm trying to share with you, Miss Sarah, is that we as family members during this time of COVID, a lot of times, um, we need to think out of the box, and not only us as family members, because I went through this with my mom, but us as workers in facilities such as ours, um, thinking out of the box to something that's just a little bit different. We've become so accustomed to visits the way they used to be, but we can still visit, we can still interact, but we just need to tweak the visit just a little bit.
Yes,
So,
my mom, excuse me for interrupting. My mom has, uh, she's not interested in any of those things. I saw something similar to what you're referencing on the television early on. So when I
mhm,
went there one day to deliver groceries, I told her to go to her window. She's upstairs, and it made her cry. It
mm,
didn't comfort her. It magnified our disconnection, and
yes,
she
ma'am.
has opted to, she doesn't want to do window visits. She doesn't want to, if she can't eat a meal with me, or but yes, thank you for that suggestion. And we're all getting through this the best we can. She's not interested in or knowledgeable in technology. They've offered FaceTime and those things, but
Mhm.
it's all it seems to do is make her more uncomfortable than bring her joy and comfort.
I understand. And in a case like that, because we've experienced that as well with a couple of our residents here, especially the one that I mentioned to you earlier, who's a wanderer, he won't stand still long enough for his loved one to visit. So the family, we got together with us and we kind of talked and said, what is something that used to resonate with him? And one thing that he used to always like were signs. And now, this is what I mean by thinking outside the box. Who would think of something like this? But as we were in conversation, one of his children happened to say, "Could we provide one of these yard signs to put outside of his window?" And we said, "Well, what would it say?" And basically, the sign just says, and maybe for next time, I'll take a picture of it and I can show it to you guys. I wish I had thought of it earlier, but thank you for bringing it up now, Miss Sarah. But the yard sign says, "We love you, Daddy." And it has on the sign each child's name.
That's fantastic.
And it now sits outside of his window. So as he's wandering and he makes it to his room, which is sort of his base of operations for the start of his wandering, he's also a shopper. So if he sees something out in the hallway that he thinks is his or he likes, he in his mind he buys it and he picks it up and he takes it to his room. But when he's in his room, you'll see him sit down on his bed, look outside of his window, and just stare at that sign.
Nice.
So it's clicking something.
Right.
He likes vanilla ice cream. So the family brings in a thing of Breyer's ice cream, and that is, even though they're not able to sit and eat ice cream with him, we're able to provide ice cream in a cone to him, and he'll sit down and enjoy the ice cream because the vanilla ice cream still means something to him. Now, it's not a connection for them, but maybe he's thinking back on why the memory of vanilla ice cream was huge to him.
Well, I
Uh,
think many valid points you bring up is we need to meet them where they're at, and I need to relax my standards and pivot. And uh, my mom, as I'm sure many of our people, aren't the people that they were. They're who they are now, and we need to meet
Correct.
them where they are now.
And that's the huge piece. You're so correct, and thank you for saying that. Um, we and it's just human nature. We want. You heard me earlier say something about not to correct our loved ones.
Right.
It's human nature. If I stumble on a word or I'm having trouble with a word, it's just human nature to try to be helpful and say, "Are you trying to say this?" Or if I say empathetic, but yet I meant sympathetic, then we would say, "You mean empathetic?" It's just what we do. But now that we're a caregiver, we have to be flexible. We have to be creative. But most of all, we have to bite our tongues and just meet them where they are. Um, Part of the training, going back to the whole fluffy scenario, instead of saying, no, there's not a fluffy here, or no, you know better, we don't allow dogs in here, that could be a trigger for someone. So we just say, no, I haven't seen Fluffy. Can you please help me find them? And then we're doing something together. It's still an activity. It's not the activity that I would prefer to do at the time, but it's still an activity. Our administrator says to everybody in orientation when they start, and I'm sorry, this just really resonates with me, but there's nothing that a resident can do or will do that will get in the way of your job. They are our job. It doesn't matter if you're the chef. It doesn't matter if you're the person who does the laundry. It doesn't matter if you're an official caregiver. It doesn't matter if you're management. If you see that someone's sitting in a chair and they're leaning over and that they have an opportunity to fall out, you go over and you help them sit further back in the chair. If you see someone's coming out of the room and they need to be wheeled somewhere, or they're having trouble wheeling themselves to get somewhere, come up to them, talk to them, ask them, what is it that where are you trying to go? Can I help you? Okay, lift your feet, let's get there. But more importantly, now they have somebody who is with them, spending time with them. It's a different type of activity than normal. So this COVID time, you're so right, Miss Sarah. It's a challenge for all of us. It's just a way of trying to figure out now, what can I do to make dad or mom or my husband, my wife have a meaningful moment with or without me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Um, some of the activities, just to kind of give you an idea, and again, all of our loved ones are different in the diagnosis. They're at a different part of this, the road. And I guess I'll just give some ideas of activities as we're coming here to a close. It's about 1:52. You know, we can do something. It doesn't have to be involved. It can be something as simple as what we call donuts with dad. Father's Day was just here. We we sent somebody out and ran them over to Krispy Kreme, and they came back with a couple dozen donuts, and we just gathered the fathers together and sat down, and we all just had donuts. It was something simple as that. Even our wanderers, they stop for a moment for donuts. It's a matter of what a little Krispy Kreme or Dunkin' Donuts will do. It just brings friends and stops people from doing everything to take a break. But donuts for dad is just a simple but huge idea. Um, One of the things you want to keep in mind, or you want to try to keep that hand-eye coordination going as well. But when you do an idea, a suggestion or an activity where you're working with hand-eye coordination, it gives you something to journal. You all have heard me talk about journaling before, but it gives you something to journal to see if there's any progression of loss of hand-eye coordination. So maybe get a balloon and play catch with your loved one. We had a gentleman, he's moved on now, unfortunately. But when he came to us, his children, he had 3 triplets. He had them late in life, but they would still play catch with them. But it wasn't catch with a ball and glove any longer. It was catch with a balloon. And 2 of them understood this. One of the children had an issue with it, and he started deciding he wanted to just sit out in the lobby or sit in the car, until I finally went out and I talked to him and I said, "You're still playing catch with dad. It's just a different type of catch. So let's, think that over and then still come in and play catch." Well, now you're playing catch with the balloon. And if they're no longer able to catch it, it might be a bad day, and you're able to report that. If a person is in a facility, you can report that to the charge nurse, or if someone's at home, you can journal it so that the next time there's a doctor's visit, or if this progresses, you can call the doctor and say, hey, I'm noticing this is happening with my husband. This is happening with my wife. Um, or you can get a pool noodle, one of those styrofoam noodles, and you can bat it back and forth like you're playing tennis or ping pong. And if they start missing it more often, then it's something for you to note that the progression of the disease might be moving along some. So that is an idea for hand-eye coordination. Or something to think about might be to keep a person engaged, is finish the line. We all know that there are cliches and all these figures of speeches that we've heard over the years. So why not just play a game with someone? For the person that said earlier, my husband doesn't like me to tell him what to do. Well, just start a game up, impromptu style, and say, oh, what was that? What was that old saying? A bird in the hand is worth, oh, what was it? A bird in the hand is worth, what, what is the end of, what's the end of that sentence? And see if they'll say, it's worth two in the bush. Now you've engaged them. There's another saying that used to come to mind that I'm having trouble now remembering. What was it? Uh, and come up with another line for them to try to remember, and then just continue that for as long as they're engaged with it. But again, you're helping them remember certain lines, and it's engaging their mind. A lot of us just think, oh no, they used to like crossword puzzles, and they can't do that anymore. Well, they still might remember certain things. Instead of sitting doing the crossword puzzle, you might be able to say what the crossword puzzle um, hint is and see if they can come up with the answer for you. That way you don't necessarily have to formally do the crossword puzzle, but you're still engaging with them. They're having an activity. You're not telling them necessarily it's activity time, but you're able to get them to participate with you. So it looks like we have a couple more minutes. Would anybody like to share one last activity that they're doing with their loved one that seems to work?
When I deliver groceries to my mom,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
put inside the grocery bag a picture of myself and a picture of flowers that I see on my morning walk.
Excellent. Excellent. That is perfect, because that way she's still able to make a connection with you and with beauty that's out there. A couple of things that still um, resonate with people: beauty and sweets. Even if they get to a point where they no longer recognize us or recognize our role, beauty, Miss Sarah's flowers, and sweets, their snacks, those tend to be there long term.
There are people in my support group. I'm part of the Children of Dementia support group through Lisa's.
Hmm.
And in my support group, some of the other gals, they play music for their person. And that music, they don't remember what today is, but they still remember all the words to those Frank Sinatra songs or whatever it is. And it seems to bring those meaningful moments that you referenced.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that.
Hey,
Um,
Daryl, this is Elena again.
yes, ma'am.
I'd love to give some words of encouragement to the caregivers, um, to remind them that this is a journey. And like any journey, there's a beginning and there's an end. And it does end. And the more that we're able to go through it, um, feeling good for ourselves when we come out, when it's over, you can look back, and not only do you look back at your loved one's life, but you look back over those years that you did the caregiving and can feel good and proud about it, and know that others notice what you do too. And that can encourage people around you who may be going through the same things, but don't have a connection to Elise's or any place else and don't realize that there are places they can go.
Thank you. One thing I always stress is Lisa's Care Connection. Marty and Kina and Lisa and all the volunteers there are a resource that so many people do not know about. I did a sensitive situation session there a number of months back, and someone came up from Buford and started asking questions, and the ladies there were able to provide information to them on resources in their area. Just because a person might not be in Columbia or might not be in LA or might not be at one of the other spots where Lisa's is touching the community, share with them the local phone number and ask them to call, because they have their hands and they're just a great resource. So please turn them on to Keena and Marty and Lisa's. It's such a wonderful resource. So just remember, it is a journey, but it's one that you do have resources for. And thank God for Keena, Marty, and Lisa for Lisa's Care Connection. You guys have a wonderful day, a wonderful rest of your week, and just stay safe and be healthy. God bless you.